Before we begin, by the end of this story, you'll be asking yourself whether justice was served, or if something darker took its place. November 28, 1994. The air inside Columbia Correctional Institution felt different that morning. Heavier, tense, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. A correctional officer turned the corner of the prison gym hallway and froze. There, on the cold tile floor near the weight room, lay one of the most infamous inmates. His glasses were shattered beside him, blood pooled beneath his head, spreading slowly across the concrete. Jeffrey Dahmer, the man whose crimes had horrified the world, was barely breathing. Minutes earlier, he had been alive, guarded, watched, locked inside one of the most secure prisons in the country. Now, he was broken and unconscious, his skull crushed by blunt force, and the most chilling part, he had been left alone for just 20 minutes. To understand how it came to this, you have to rewind 2 years. In 1992, after a trial that dominated headlines, Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. No possibility of parole. He would die behind bars. For many, that wasn't enough. His crimes had shaken the public to its core. The murders of 17 young men had shaken the public to its core. The details were so disturbing that even seasoned detectives struggled. When Dahmer entered Columbia Correctional Institution, prison officials knew they had a problem. He wasn't just another inmate, he was a target. At first, he was kept in solitary confinement for his own protection. Locked away, isolated, watched constantly. But over time, something changed. Dahmer insisted he didn't want protection. He requested to join the general population. To some guards, that seemed reckless. To others, it was inevitable. Prison overcrowding and routine protocols eventually placed him among other inmates during work assignments, and that's where the tension began to simmer. Inmates whispered when he walked past, some stared in silence, others laughed. A few muttered threats under their breath. He worked cleaning bathrooms. He scrubbed showers. He kept his head down, but he wasn't invisible. One inmate in particular had been watching him, Christopher Scarver. Scarver was already serving a life sentence for murder. Quiet, deeply religious. Known for keeping to himself, until he didn't. Other inmates later claimed Scarver carried newspaper clippings of Dahmer's crimes. Some said he believed God had sent him a mission. Others said he simply couldn't tolerate sharing space with a man responsible for such horrors. The prison administration saw none of this as an immediate threat. That assumption would prove catastrophic. On the morning of November 28th, Dahmer, Scarver, and another inmate were assigned to clean the prison gym bathrooms. Standard procedure: 3 inmates, 1 guard stationed nearby. At approximately 8:10 a.m., the guard left them unsupervised. Just for a short while, long enough, inside the locker room, something shifted. There were no cameras, no witnesses willing to speak in detail. Only fragments reconstructed later through reports and testimony. Scarver picked up a metal bar, reportedly removed from exercise equipment. The confrontation was brief. No shouting heard from the hallway. No alarm triggered. By the time the guard returned, Jeffrey Dahmer was on the floor, skull fractured. The other inmate had also been attacked. Scarver stood nearby. Calm, he reportedly told officers, "God told me to do it." Dahmer was rushed to a nearby hospital. Doctors tried to save him. At 9:11 a.m., he was pronounced dead. 34 years old. For some, it felt like poetic justice. For others, it raised terrifying questions. How does one of the most notorious criminals in modern history end up alone with another convicted killer? Why was supervision so lax? Was this negligence, or something quietly allowed? But the most unsettling detail hadn't surfaced yet. Because in the days that followed, investigators uncovered something about Dahmer's behavior inside prison, something that may have sealed his fate. And when they pieced together what had really been happening behind those concrete walls, it changed the entire narrative of that morning. What they discovered suggested this wasn't just an act of sudden rage. It may have been inevitable. After Jeffrey Dahmer's death, Columbia Correctional Institution went into quiet lockdown. Official statements were brief, controlled, clinical, and inmate-on-inmate assault, but inside the prison walls, the story was far more volatile. Investigators from the Wisconsin Department of Corrections began interviewing guards, inmates, supervisors, anyone who might explain how one of the most infamous killers had been left alone with another convicted murderer. And almost immediately, a pattern began to emerge. Jeffrey Dahmer had not been keeping a low profile. In fact, several inmates reported that he had been doing something deeply disturbing, even by prison standards. According to statements later given by fellow inmates, Dahmer had developed a habit that enraged those around him. He would reportedly shape his prison food into forms resembling body parts. He would drizzle ketchup over them, creating grotesque imitations meant to resemble blood. Some claimed he laughed afterward. To the outside world, it sounded surreal. But inside a maximum security prison, it was seen as something else: mockery, disrespect, a reminder of crimes that many inmates considered unforgivable. Prison culture operates on a brutal hierarchy of crimes. But crimes against vulnerable victims carry a different weight. And Dahmer's crimes, calculated, horrifying, intimate, made him radioactive. Christopher Scarver had noticed. Scarver wasn't known for socializing. He spent much of his time reading the Bible. He claimed to hear voices. Some guards described him as withdrawn but stable. Others said he was unpredictable. But multiple sources later confirmed something critical. Scarver had requested not to be assigned with Dahmer. That request was ignored. On November 28th, when the 3 inmates were sent to clean the gym bathrooms, the supervising officer made a decision that would later come under intense scrutiny. He left them unsupervised, not for hours, not even for half an hour, just long enough. Investigators pressed him why. His answer was simple: routine. In that prison, inmates assigned to work details were often given limited autonomy. The area was considered secure. The men had worked together before without incident. But records would later show something unsettling. There had been warnings, reports of rising hostility toward Dahmer, complaints about his behavior, tension among inmates, even verbal altercations in the weeks prior. Nothing that officially required lockdown, but enough to suggest the environment was unstable. Then came Scarver's statement. When questioned about the attack, he didn't deny it. He didn't attempt to escape blame. He said Dahmer had crossed a line. Scarver claimed he confronted him about the food incidents, the grotesque shapes, the mockery. He said Dahmer showed no remorse, no fear, no humility. According to Scarver, the final moments inside that locker room weren't chaotic, they were deliberate. He picked up a metal bar from nearby exercise equipment. He approached Dahmer. He asked him if he had done the things reported in the newspapers, the crimes that had shocked the world. Scarver later said Dahmer nodded. That was enough. The first strike fractured his skull. The second ensured he wouldn't stand up again. The third, Scarver would later claim, was for the victims. When officers arrived, Scarver reportedly handed over the weapon without resistance, calm, composed, as if he had been waiting. But here's where the story becomes more complicated and more uncomfortable. In the weeks following Dahmer's death, several inmates claimed something chilling. They believed the guards knew what was coming. Some alleged that prison staff were tired of managing the tension, tired of the constant threats, tired of the notoriety he brought to the institution. No official investigation ever concluded that the attack was allowed to happen. But the question lingered: why leave 3 violent inmates alone in a secluded area? Why ignore prior hostility reports? Why deny Scarver's earlier request to be reassigned? The Department of Corrections maintained that the attack was spontaneous, an unforeseeable act of violence between inmates. Yet for many observers, the outcome felt inevitable. A monster had entered prison, and prison had answered in its own language. Scarver was given another life sentence. No chance of parole. No privileges. He was transferred to another facility and placed in long-term segregation. Public reaction was divided. Some called him a vigilante. Others called him another killer seeking attention. But one detail continued to surface in interviews years later. Scarver insisted he had not planned the attack for weeks. He said the opportunity simply presented itself, an unlocked moment, an absent guard, a metal bar within reach, and a man whose past followed him into every room. But, as the dust settled and the headlines faded, one final revelation emerged, a piece of information that reframed the entire narrative of Jeffrey Dahmer's final months, because according to prison officials, something had changed in him shortly before his death. Something that suggested he might have been seeking something unexpected behind bars. And if it's true, it adds a haunting layer to what happened in the weeks before his death. Jeffrey Dahmer had begun telling prison chaplains something that surprised even the guards. He said he had found faith, not the shallow kind spoken for comfort, but a structured, routine devotion. He attended Bible study, requested religious reading material, and met regularly with a minister. In May 1994, he was baptized inside prison. Some believed it was manipulation. A final performance from a man who had fooled neighbors, police, and victims. Others weren't so sure. Those who observed him closely reported something subtle but real. He had stopped trying to protect himself. Dahmer had once requested isolation, then asked to join general population. When offered protective custody again after threats increased, he declined. He reportedly told a prison minister that if someone killed him, he understood. That word, understood, echoed differently after November 28th. When investigators reviewed his final weeks, they noted that Dahmer had grown unusually quiet. Less reactive, less defensive. He no longer flinched at insults in the cafeteria. He didn't argue when inmates mocked him. It was as if he had accepted something inevitable. Christopher Scarver, meanwhile, maintained his version of events. He said the attack wasn't random rage, it was moral confrontation. He claimed Dahmer showed no remorse during their final exchange, no apology, no visible guilt. But here's what complicates the story. There were no witnesses to confirm exactly what was said. Only two men stood in that locker room, and one of them never walked out alive. The other inmate survived initially, but later died. His perspective was never fully documented. So the truth of those final seconds exists only in Scarver's retelling. And that leaves a chilling possibility. What if the final confrontation wasn't about revenge? What if it was about something else entirely? Power, attention, belief, or even instability? Years later, Scarver gave interviews from prison. He described feeling disgusted by Dahmer's presence. He said he couldn't tolerate sharing space with someone who had committed such crimes. He framed his actions as divine justice. But mental health evaluations over time revealed Scarver struggled with severe psychiatric issues, including schizophrenia. Was this a calculated act of moral vengeance? Or the violent impulse of a deeply unstable man, placed in proximity to a notorious target? The prison administration never admitted fault. No staff member was criminally charged. Policies were reviewed, but no official conspiracy was proven. Yet critics continued to question the decision to leave those inmates unsupervised. Because here's the reality. Maximum security prisons are designed to prevent exactly this kind of incident. And yet, it happened. Dahmer's death closed one chapter of horror for the public, but it opened another conversation entirely about justice, about punishment, about whether prison is meant to contain violence or simply relocate it. For the families of Dahmer's victims, reactions were mixed. Some expressed relief, others said nothing could undo what had already been done. His death did not resurrect their sons, brothers, or friends. It only ended the possibility of appeals, interviews, more headlines. In a strange way, prison had silenced him permanently. But here's the haunting part. When Jeffrey Dahmer was pronounced dead at 9:11 a.m., the world assumed the story was over. It wasn't. His case continued to inspire documentaries, books, television series, and endless analysis. His name remained embedded in pop culture, His crimes continue to generate attention decades later. And that creates an uncomfortable question. Did his death inside prison deliver justice? Or did it transform him into something else, a figure permanently frozen in notoriety? Christopher Scarver remains behind bars to this day, serving multiple life sentences in solitary conditions. He rarely speaks publicly now. Two men entered that gymnasium work detail on November 28th. One walked out breathing. One didn't. And between those concrete walls, the justice system revealed something raw. Even monsters are not immune to the violence they once inflicted on others. But here's the twist that lingers long after the headlines faded. Jeffrey Dahmer once told a minister he deserved death. He got it, just not from the state. Subscribe, because some prisons hold more than inmates. They hold unfinished endings.